Mark Reynolds was a devoted husband, Cassandra Reynolds was a loving wife, and Emily Dawson was just a 17-year-old cousin in need of shelter, until one forbidden affair turned their lives into a deadly spiral of obsession, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. In a quiet corner of Jefferson County, Missouri, life moved slowly and predictably. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets had a hard time surviving. Mark Reynolds, a 37-year-old auto mechanic, lived in a modest two-story house on a tree-lined street with his wife Cassandra and their 2 young children. He was the kind of man who waved at neighbors, fixed cars with patience, and rarely raised his voice. To the people around him, Mark was the image of a dependable husband and father. Cassandra, 34, worked part-time at a nearby diner and was known for her warm smile and devotion to her family. Together, they looked like a couple who had it all figured out. Things began to change when Cassandra's 17-year-old cousin, Emily Dawson, came to live with them. Emily's parents had recently gone through a messy divorce, and Cassandra, always the helper, offered her home as a safe space. It was meant to be temporary, just until things calmed down, but as weeks turned into months, Emily settled into the household routine. She was a quiet teenager, polite, a bit reserved, and mostly kept to herself. Cassandra saw her as a little sister, and treated her with care. Mark at first seemed indifferent to her presence, but slowly, that indifference turned into something else. Mark started spending more time at home, skipping his usual after-work hangouts at the garage. Emily, curious about cars, began helping him during repairs. She'd hand him tools, ask questions, and linger in the garage long after the sun went down. Cassandra didn't think much of it. In her mind, Mark was just being kind, trying to give Emily a distraction from her broken home, but small things began to shift. Mark's phone, once left lying around, was now always in his pocket. He started locking the garage door. He took longer trips to the store, and was often unreachable for hours. Neighbors noticed things too. They saw Mark driving around town with Emily in the passenger seat, sometimes late in the evening. A few mentioned it in passing, but in a small town, people are careful about what they say. Nobody wanted to accuse a man with such a solid reputation, and Emily, just a teenager, hardly seemed capable of anything improper. Still, whispers began to circle, even if no one said anything aloud. Inside the Reynolds home, tension began to build. Cassandra often returned from work to find Mark and Emily laughing in the kitchen or watching TV too closely on the couch. It didn't look like a crime, it looked like a bond, and Cassandra, though unsure of her suspicions, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She started watching more closely, noticing glances, silences, and how quickly conversations changed when she walked into a room, but she kept it all inside, hoping it was just her imagination. The truth, however, was far worse than she feared. What began as a seemingly harmless living arrangement was growing into something dangerous, something that would eventually shatter their family forever. Emily's presence in the Reynolds household had subtly changed the atmosphere. At first it was easy to ignore the quiet girl, simply adjusting to a new environment. But over time, something began to shift in ways too subtle for Cassandra to immediately detect. Emily and Mark started spending more time together, and it no longer seemed coincidental. Whether in the garage or at the backyard fire pit, their interactions were frequent, and their connection deepened under the guise of casual familiarity. Mark had always been predictable, his life structured and methodical. But as the weeks passed, his behavior became less consistent. He began arriving late to work or skipping days altogether. Cassandra assumed he was simply overwhelmed, and she gave him space, not realizing that space would be filled by Emily. What looked like a growing friendship between a man and his wife's younger cousin was, in reality, evolving into something far more inappropriate. It started with small, secretive exchanges, passing notes left in tool drawers, locked text conversations, and occasional trips into town that Emily insisted were harmless errands. Mark, who once barely glanced at his phone, now guarded it like a lifeline. He would excuse himself during dinner to take calls in the garage or stay up late under the pretense of working, though no mechanical job ever seemed finished. Emily, who once helped with chores, now disappeared during those same late hours, returning only when Cassandra was already asleep. Their affair, though hidden, was intense. Mark, nearly 20 years older, became obsessed with the idea that Emily understood him better than Cassandra ever could. He convinced himself it was love, not lust. Not manipulation, but something pure that had just found its way through unexpected circumstances. Emily, still a teenager, seemed swept up in the attention. She wore his old jackets, rode with him to parts of town where no one knew them, and soon started skipping school entirely. Their relationship crossed every moral boundary, and still, they treated it like something real and sacred. Behind closed doors, they began making promises. Mark told Emily he would leave Cassandra, that their love didn't need to be kept secret forever. He painted a future of open roads and freedom, where no one would question their bond. Emily, isolated and emotionally vulnerable, clung to his words. The illusion became their truth. But illusions have a way of unraveling. Cassandra began noticing Emily's mood swings, her sudden joy followed by deep withdrawal. She questioned the extra errands Mark insisted on running and the way Emily flinched when certain topics came up. There were nights when Cassandra would wake up and find the living room empty, the garage light still on and the faint hum of voices outside. One evening, she found a motel key tucked under the driver's seat of Mark's truck. When she asked him about it, he brushed it off with a lie about helping a friend in need. The deception had grown too large to contain. With every new lie, Mark pushed his family further into danger. What neither he nor Emily realized was that their secret wasn't just tearing a marriage apart, it was planting the seeds of a deadly betrayal that would soon erupt into violence. By the time November arrived, the tension inside the Reynolds household had become impossible to ignore. Cassandra, once trusting and easygoing, had grown withdrawn and quiet. She no longer smiled at the breakfast table, no longer asked Mark about his day, and had stopped trying to include Emily in conversations. Instead, she watched silently, carefully, putting pieces together in her mind. Each late-night garage session, each text Mark quickly hid, every awkward silence when she entered a room, all of it had begun to point toward something she could no longer deny. Cassandra's breaking point came one cold morning, when she found an old phone in a drawer, one Mark had stopped using months ago. It was locked, but with enough time and guesswork, she managed to get in. What she found changed everything. Dozens of photos of Emily, many of them taken secretly, text messages filled with affection, secret plans and expressions of love. Her husband and her young cousin had been living a second life right under her nose. Heart pounding, Cassandra confronted her older sister, Emily's mother. They sat in a parked car for hours, as Cassandra poured out the details, showing her the messages and pictures. Her sister was horrified, torn between disbelief and rage. They discussed going to the police, but Cassandra was hesitant. She feared public humiliation, the effect it would have on her children, and the chaos it would unleash. She wanted to protect her family, even as it was falling apart. Determined to confront the truth directly, Cassandra made a bold choice. Without telling Mark, she arranged to meet Emily after school. The meeting took place at a quiet park nearby, away from prying eyes. No one knows exactly what was said during their conversation. But whatever transpired, it shook Emily to her core. She returned home that evening pale and silent. She avoided Mark, stayed locked in her room, and refused to eat dinner. Mark noticed immediately that something was wrong. When he asked Emily what happened, she gave vague answers, and eventually broke down, admitting that Cassandra knew everything. In a panic, Mark's carefully constructed illusion began to crumble. He tried calling Cassandra, but she didn't answer. She had told no one where she was going that evening. Later that night, Cassandra didn't return home. At first, Mark claimed she had left after a heated argument. He told the kids their mother needed space and would be back soon. But as the hours stretched into the next day, and then the day after, concern began to spread. Cassandra's car was gone, but her purse, keys, and phone were still at home. Her friends hadn't heard from her. She hadn't shown up for work. Cassandra Reynolds had vanished without a trace. The police were contacted, and a missing persons report was filed. Search teams were deployed. Mark acted worried, calling friends, putting up a front of concern, but his story didn't quite add up, and when investigators began digging deeper, they uncovered more than just a missing woman. They found the trail of a dangerous affair and the chilling possibility of murder. 2 days after Cassandra's disappearance, a grim discovery was made along a narrow, wooded path just outside of Jefferson County. Her car was found abandoned near a shallow ditch, its doors unlocked and the driver's seat pushed far back, as if someone much taller than Cassandra had driven it last. Inside, officers found grocery bags, an unopened carton of milk, and most alarmingly, a broken cell phone beneath the passenger seat. A smear of blood was visible on the dashboard, barely noticeable at first glance, but impossible to ignore under the glare of a flashlight. Something terrible had happened. The police escalated the case immediately. Search teams combed through nearby woods, ditches, and creeks. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Volunteers from the community joined the search, many of them shocked that someone as kind and quiet as Cassandra could simply vanish. But the deeper the search went, the darker the clues became. There were signs of a struggle near the tree line, broken branches, scuffed dirt, and drag marks that led into the underbrush. 3 days into the search, a grim discovery was made less than a mile from the car. Cassandra's body was found buried in a shallow grave, covered with leaves and loose dirt. She had been beaten and strangled. Her hands showed signs of resistance, scratches, broken nails, and bruises that told the story of a fierce struggle. The autopsy later confirmed what detectives had already suspected. She had fought desperately for her life. The attack had been brutal and personal. Whoever had done this knew her well. Mark was brought in for questioning the same day her body was found. His reaction seemed rehearsed: shock, then grief, followed by confusion. He claimed they had fought. Yes, but insisted she had stormed out and never returned. Investigators pressed harder, asking about his whereabouts during the hours Cassandra went missing. His timeline was vague. He couldn't account for a 2-hour window on the evening she vanished. And when asked about Emily, he became defensive, insisting there was no relationship beyond concern for a troubled teenager. But phone records told a different story. Emily had made several calls and sent multiple messages to Mark during the exact window of Cassandra's disappearance. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Mark and Emily together late at night, driving toward the woods where Cassandra's body was eventually found. The noose was tightening. Detectives brought Emily in for questioning next. At first, she stuck to the story she and Mark had rehearsed, that Cassandra had left on her own, angry and unstable. But the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with the reality of her fingerprints on the car door and phone records placing her at the scene, Emily's resolve began to crack. Her hands trembled. Her voice shook. Then finally, under the weight of guilt and fear, she gave in. She told them everything, or at least enough to paint a horrifying picture of what had really happened in the woods that night. The secret affair had spiraled into something deadly. A plan had been made. A confrontation had turned violent. And now, a husband and a teenage girl were both caught in a web of lies, death, and consequences they could no longer escape. After hours of questioning, Emily finally broke. Her confession was quiet at first, barely audible through the tears, but soon it became a torrent of details that stunned even the most experienced investigators. She said that Mark had called her the night Cassandra confronted her, panicked and erratic. He told Emily that Cassandra knew everything and threatened to go to the police. He said his life would be ruined, he'd lose his children, his job, everything. Emily, confused and terrified, listened as Mark pleaded with her to meet him. He had a plan, he said, a way to fix everything. According to Emily, Mark convinced Cassandra to meet him at a secluded area under the pretense of wanting to talk things through. He told her they could discuss everything privately, just the two of them. Cassandra agreed, likely still believing her marriage could be salvaged, that Mark could be reasoned with. But when she arrived, it was clear from the beginning that Mark didn't want to talk. What happened next unfolded quickly and violently. Emily claimed she stayed hidden at first, nearby but out of sight. She heard shouting, then the sounds of a struggle. By the time she approached, Cassandra was on the ground, barely conscious. Mark stood over her, breathing heavily, his fists bloodied. Cassandra was still alive, trying to crawl away. Emily said she froze, unable to move until Mark looked at her and told her to help. In a moment she could never fully explain, she did. They carried Cassandra deeper into the woods, away from the roadside. There Mark strangled her while Emily stood a few feet away, crying and shaking, but doing nothing to stop it. When it was over, Mark ordered her to help him bury the body. They used their hands, sticks, and a flat piece of metal found nearby to dig a shallow grave. When it was done, they left in silence. Investigators were horrified. But they had more than a confession. They had digital evidence, physical traces, and a trail of lies that had finally unraveled. Emily's account matched the forensic timeline. Her prints were found at the burial site. Her phone had pinged off towers near the woods that night. And most damning of all, text messages recovered from Mark's phone showed disturbing exchanges between the two, including messages where they discussed life after Cassandra. Mark was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. Emily, though still legally a minor, was charged as an adult with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. The community was stunned. The case made local and national headlines. A husband, a teenage girl, a brutal murder, and a family destroyed. In court, Mark pleaded not guilty. He claimed Emily had acted alone, that he had been manipulated by a disturbed teenager. But the evidence was stacked against him. Emily, in a move that shocked many, agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her testimony was graphic and detailed. In the end, Mark was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Emily received 15 years with the possibility of parole after 7. The case left a deep scar on Jefferson County. A woman was dead, a family was shattered, and a dark secret had become a public nightmare. What began as a secret affair ended in a brutal killing, proving that sometimes the most dangerous crimes are committed not by strangers but by those closest to us.